Boom.
This is Tim Gray, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
I noticed some old-timey hi-fi type situations, and maybe is that a Mac 2 back there behind your head?
Macintosh Plus, 1986.
Is a Plus 86? Oh, so fancy, a newer model.
A newer model.
That's crazy. Well, I love that. That's right up my alley there. I love it. And also World War II, Bob Hope, etc. It's all great. I got a chance to watch your documentary, and as always, when I see these old Bob Hope documentaries, I'm just amazed at the changes he made. So I'm a combat veteran. I dined at the Bob Hope Chow Hall dining facility in, I guess, gosh, where was I? Was I in Iraq? Maybe. It's kind of hard to remember exactly where I was. It must have been.
Yeah.
And, and they tore that thing down a long time ago, but that's the impact. And the impact with that also is the USO became this giant machine. And so everybody from Billy Blanks to John Elway, came to camps where I was at. And usually I was on camps that were far removed, but he made this machine something that people felt called to do and gave folks the Denver Broncos cheerleaders, Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders. All these folks come out and they do their best to give us a little bit of home, a little bit of sunshine when we're deployed. Yeah. It's great. It's really great.
Yeah, it is.
How long have you been involved in this part of Bob Hope's legacy?
For about a year. We pitched them on doing a story about Bob Hope. We look at this year as being a big year for us. It's the 80th anniversary of the end of the war. So we're looking for different topics that hopefully we can introduce to young people, but also resonate with older people. And we thought Bob Hope would be pretty good.
Right. You pick a very specific troupe of players for your documentary. Why did you pick that as opposed to other? Obviously, World War II is an important thing, but he's taken a lot of people out on the road with him to do these things.
Yeah.
Why this group?
He had a really interesting troupe with Jerry Colonna, Francis Langford, Patty Thomas, Tony Romano played guitar. They were a mix of vaudevillians who could dance, who were beautiful. The women were beautiful. They could sing. The comedy was just off the charts, especially, at that time. And so we focused on Bob because when you think about World War II and entertaining the troops, he's always the poster boy for that. And it's well-deserved. There were others who went out and did it. Bing Crosby, Mickey Rooney, a lot of Doris Day, a lot of those stars from the 30s and 40s went out and traveled. But to me, he was the guy who put the most in. And over those years that America was involved in the war, he just was on the road constantly.
Anybody who does that work has done it. They get credit for it. Whether they go to Kuwait or Germany or all the way into the heart of Iraq or Afghanistan, they get credit for it.
Yeah.
What Bob did, though, is like 1,000 times bigger.
Yeah.
He compelled people that did not have to do this, could have done other things to support the war effort without ever having to go be as close to combat as, especially in Bob's time, as they were, and nearly die on several occasions.
Yeah.
What drove that in Bob?
He was very patriotic. He was actually born in England, came over to the United States, immigrated, grew up in Cleveland, and became an American citizen. He loved his adopted country. He just loved being an American. And I also think that he just had a good heart. And he just genuinely embraced people and getting to know people. And everybody who ever met him in the service, especially, always left feeling like that guy's going to be my friend for life. He just had that way with people because he would remember their names. He would repeat their names. He just did so much to ingratiate himself with the troops that it just, it took off. And he was one of the biggest stars in Hollywood at the time. I mean, he was a top 10 box office guy. He had the #1 radio show on NBC, the Pepsodent Show. He was in demand, and he could have made a lot of money staying at home and just making movies. So he wanted to go overseas.
Yeah. When you went overseas back then, like today, if you and I were to go on a tour and everything, if you hop on a C-130, that's still not a comfortable plane to fly on. It's pipes and like hammocks for your butt.
Yeah.
But you do it and you don't complain about it. But if you do that for 14 hours, it is exhausting just to get from, I don't know, deployment point A to Kuwait or to Germany, wherever you go, into Kuwait. Sometimes it's a couple legs of flights. That's today with jets.
Yeah, with jets.
This is back then with, look, maybe more comfort than a lot of planes, but still
they didn't have
not what you would consider comfortable.
They were all prop planes. The jet age hadn't come about, until the end of World War II. So they're traveling 80,000 miles during the war, and it's all on C-47s. It's all on Catalinas. It's all on Pan Am Clippers. It's all on prop planes that had to refuel, frequently. And the issue is, it's okay, maybe when you're going to Europe, you can stop in Greenland and Ireland and Scotland and refuel to get to England. But when you're going across the Pacific, you better know you have enough gas to get you to Hawaii, because other than that, you're gone. And you're never going to be found. So it was dangerous. The logistics were crazy. Now people fly business class to Australia, but back then, the best you could do was the Pan Am Clipper, and those had all been taken for the war effort. So you're on B-17s, you're on B-24s, you're on, the C-47. So it was not glamorous at all, and they still did it.
Even today, when you fly on a C-5 or a C-17, big gigantic jets, they have very comfortable seats for you to sit in, and then behind you are tanks and shells and all that stuff. But even now, again, the comfort level, and to do that many miles, there's one thing to support something, but that is an uncommon drive for a man that, again, his time is money. Yeah. He's very busy. He could do 100 other things at home for the war effort, but chose to do this. I don't want to lose track of that, because people understand exactly what it was that he did. And then he brought his friends with him and compelled other people to go. Bing Crosby didn't have to go do that stuff, but he
felt pressure. He felt pressure. and all of Hollywood felt pressure, and they did a great job of being patriotic. Hollywood did with the Hollywood canteen that they had and there, and in other aspects, Hollywood and their directors and actors and show people just wanted to be a part of one of the most patriotic times in history, and they all bought in, and they all did far and above what others would do. You think of some of the baseball players who lost great years, like Ted Williams and Bobby Feller and Yogi Berra, in the prime of their careers, leaving those jobs and going to fight in a war, and leaving the best years of their baseball playing lives, somewhere in Europe or Korea or the Pacific. And it's just extraordinary. It was a different generation. I don't know if they do that today.
I can't imagine. I don't know that they should either. I mean, that's the other thing. But if Brad Pitt, if a giant war jumped off, Brad Pitt certainly had the chance to go become a fighter pilot and fly fighter missions. Maybe he wouldn't have been approved to fly fighter missions, because you got to be a very specific kind of person. But it's the fact that Clark Gable went out and became a pilot. Yeah, it's almost like that's what we're talking about. Talking about George Clooney with a mustache going out and saying, "I insist on getting closer to the fight."
Jimmy Stewart was the same way, and Jimmy Stewart flew a bunch of missions on the B-24 as a pilot, and was really affected by it. And people saw when he was in It's a Wonderful Life in 1946, when he was in Martini's bar and he's crying. Those are real tears. I mean, he was remembering his time as a combat pilot in World War II, and he channeled that to bring it to one of the most emotional scenes of one of the greatest movies ever made. And it was incredible. And he was in before Pearl Harbor, Jimmy Stewart. He loved to fly. And and today the closest example that we have is probably Gary Sinise and what Gary does. He not only narrated this film, but Gary has his Lieutenant Dan Band and Gary Sinise Foundation, and he does such an amazing job for veterans. And so he's kind of today's modern Bob Hope, going to Iraq, going to Afghanistan, going all over the country to entertain the troops. And it's a nice legacy to have, and Gary carries it very well.
Rob Riggle deserves mentioning.
Yes, Rob as well, who is a Marine. Yeah.
Wait, is he still a Marine? Is he still a reservist?
You're never not a Marine.
Oh, yeah.
Marines will tell you
that's true.
that you're never a retired Marine. You're always a Marine. Yeah. So we always say he's still a Marine. Adam Driver is another one who was a Marine, still a Marine. So Rob does a lot. as well. So
Yeah.
there's still
Yeah.
some very patriotic people out there who understand, as combat veterans, what a difference that morale can make.
I'm here to tell you, it's amazing. And I guess we should say apologies, Sir General Stewart and Colonel Riggle, because that's really who they are in this case, is as guys again who could have done something else, but these guys chose to go do this. There is that power when you. Speaking of movies, one of the things we all say when we're deployed is it's like Groundhog Day. You don't know what day it is because you're like, oh, we're having Mexican food. That must be, is it Tuesday? It must be Tuesday. And you literally have no idea because you work every day, like 10-day weeks, easy. You're talking 35-day weeks, you just keep going and going and going. And to have something come to your place, even the smallest little outpost I've been to, for the most part, will get something. It may not be the prime A person, but somebody will come out. And I use Billy Blanks as an example because I was way up in Missoula Airfield, and he came out there and did a workout with us.
That's great.
I didn't go see him because I had to work that day, which is very common. But it's just neat to know that someone cared. It is not easy to get to Mosul. You've got to go to Kuwait, to Baghdad. You've got to wait on weather, and sometimes people understand this about military air. If it's at all dangerous to fly, wind, sand, lightning, they don't fly. I've gone on a flight, a super short flight where maybe it's 20 minutes in a helicopter. They flared to land, canceled, right back. We were there. We could see it. We could almost jump out of the helicopter, but it was too dangerous to land. And so they canceled and went back. Yeah. And so when that person's there and they're waiting, I've laid on my back, just looked at the sky for hours waiting for a movement. And you can't leave the flight line because the helicopter comes and you're not on it. You get in a lot of trouble. And so you just spend a lot of time doing that. And that is humbling when you are someone like Bob Hope or Brad Pitt. Even if they get special movement consideration, the military is not going to move someone. And we lost people in situations like that. Secretary Brown back in the 90s when I was in Bosnia, we lost that guy. It's dangerous to move via air in a combat zone.
And think about World War II now. So it's a global war. So no matter if you go west or you go east to Europe, you're not only flying in those conditions, but there's a chance you're going to get shot down. There's a chance that a German, 109 is going to pull up alongside your plane. And they were really worried about someone of Bob Hope's stature being listed as KIA and what that would do to the morale of the country. And that was one of the reasons why they didn't want him or some of these other guys in combat. But he still pushed to go and came very close a few times to dying himself.
Talk about that a little bit, because that's always shocking when you hear these stories. And
they were coming back from the Aleutians in Alaska, he and his troop, and they lost radio contact, and they were in a sleet storm, and it was raining and sleeting, and they lost contact with the airport. It was a black night, and all of a sudden, another plane came near them and felt their prop wash and radioed to the airport saying there should not be another plane up here with us. And the airport reasoned that it was the Bob Hope plane. We got to get all our searchlights up. They don't have radio contact. And fortunately, they got their searchlights up, and the pilot of this, whatever plane it was, a C-47, was able to land. But they came close to disappearing in Alaska. And then there was a crash landing in a lake in Australia that they walked away from. They were on the front line, so they had to dive in the foxholes at time. They were strafed by German planes in North Africa. He wanted to be as close to the front, entertaining the guys who were actually doing the fighting as possible. And as you know, as a veteran, that means going places where it gets a little hot, in many ways. So that's what he did. He wanted to be as close to the guys who needed that lift, that morale lift, as possible. And they took a lot of chances.
Speaking of people who died in planes doing war, stuff, it's crazy. But Glenn Miller, and so if we were to take this and go back 80 years, it'd be like, I don't know, let's pick a very famous. Questlove runs a band, right? He runs a number of things. Let's say Questlove is going to do a USO tour, and his plane just disappears. They don't even know what happened.
Never found it.
Show up,
right?
And then. Not only does Glenn Miller die, the very next day, the Battle of the Bulge begins. And so there's not even time to worry about stupid Glenn Miller. We got this defining fight, of this thing that doesn't end until really in January officially. But that's the pace of things.
Yeah.
And so not that we didn't care about Glenn Miller, but that's the cost. And so it wasn't just that Bob Hope's plane got found, and it's like, no, this easily could have happened. It easily could have. These planes also weren't the quality that they are today in terms of safety and everything else, because there was no time for that.
They were not pressurized. They were,
Right.
you're flying at a certain altitude because you can't go up any higher. So you're flying in the weather elements a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And they still haven't found Glenn Miller's plane. It's somewhere in the English Channel, and there have been efforts to look for it. But he got knocked off the headlines by the Battle of the Bulge, and that's unfortunate.
Yeah.
But
and so the time frame, it would be like Questlove dying right before Christmas in 2024. Like that's what it would be like. And I can remember Christmas like it was yesterday, because it just wasn't that long ago. And so that highlights that. One of the funny things about military units, and this is a good example of World War II and airplanes, because they're trying to keep them in the air. Today we might say there's always time for safety. Back then there's like, there's always time for safety. Let's get this plane in the air.
We need the plane and its people in the air now. But sir, no, get them up. They got wings. They got a fin on the back. Send them up.
Radio comms weren't as good. Radar was in its infancy. All that kind of stuff. So really just not flying blind, because they were skilled at it, but
they're good pilots. But it's still, you're flying in the middle of a world war. There's a reason you don't fly over Russian airspace now, or airspace over countries that are at war, like Ukraine and others. Because now there's a chance you could take out a passenger jet with a missile. Back then, the enemy was everywhere. Planes were everywhere, enemy planes. So it was tough. It was just all around tough, and you had to really want to do it.
We've talked a lot about the logistics and the lack of comfort and the danger of the flying thing, but then you land in Australia and you start hopping around the South Pacific, and people Bob Hope entertains, and he knows, the ladies know, good number of these kids are going to die and be named
within days.
Sometimes the next day. I mean, it's crazy. And you guys spend a lot of time in that with the letters, and that book that goes with that shows those letters. It's remarkable.
It's like Martha Bolton and Linda Hope worked on that book. And it's just a sampling of some of the most important letters that Bob Hope received and sent during World War II. And a lot of them are really heartbreaking. My son Andy saw you on Pavuvu. The next day he was killed in the opening wave at Peleliu. And I just want you to know how important it was for me that he enjoyed a last day of entertainment by you in his life. And Bob got a lot of letters like that. So heartbreaking.
It makes me emotional just thinking about it, because it is a powerful thing. And it talks about this, and this is why you do it, because someone does take the time to write you a letter. And I love the letters you guys focused on, where the fellas are writing into Bob. And sometimes even giving him the business a little bit, but other times giving him taskings. Hey, Bob, I need you to do something for me.
I need a fruitcake. We're in a foxhole in Italy, but what we need is a 10-pound fruitcake. We asked Bing Crosby for one, but he didn't get back to us. Well, you send us a fruitcake. And but they always treated Bob like he was one of the guys. He was like Ernie Pyle. Ernie Pyle was one of the great journalists of World War II. When he would be at the front lines with the soldiers and everybody else, he would just be one of the guys. And that's how they looked at Bob Hope, that he was friendly. He was one of the guys that we could write him letters, that he would potentially write us back. They would have specific requests of Bob during World War II. A soldier would hand him a letter in Europe and say, could you deliver this to my parents back in California? And they'd get a knock at the door, and there'd be Bob Hope with a letter from their son who was in North Africa, just letting the parents know that, I'm okay. Or they would ask him to call their family members, and he would do it. It was just little things that people don't know about that really make you appreciate Bob Hope even more.
And if Bob Hope shows at your door, there's about a minute where he's just going to tell 422 jokes.
I know. It's going to be like a quick one-liner, some eyebrow raising, and a punchline, but it affected him. Linda talked about that. He didn't want to talk about a lot of the letters after the war. Anybody who was there and looked into all these smiling faces and knowing that 30% would be casualties the next day, that eats away at you. And so after the war, I think he went on doing this in Korea and Vietnam and other places, but World War II, he kind of was able to compartmentalize somewhat and continue his career.
I know someone who lives in Toluca Lake, where Bob's house was, and I'll tell you right now, I can't drive by that house without feeling the impact of all of that. Because being a combat guy, and I don't know, Bob, I'm 55, so Bob was alive and doing things when I was alive and everything.
Yeah.
But he wasn't like a big star to me. I understood that he was, but what really matters to me is that USO stuff. And every time I see these USO folks come, even if it's just some band from Milwaukee that's just doing their part, and I go up and I thank those guys because, you know, it's easier to stay home. And it really makes me, when I see Bob's house, I get emotional. I really do.
He was getting about 30,000 letters a week at Toluca Lake. And his secretary, Marjorie Hughes, saved a lot of the most poignant letters and also archived every letter that he got. And you see a lot of them in the book. But it's just, you know, when guys would write him, they would want to tell him jokes, their own jokes. They weren't writing about the horror of war and what it was like to be at Guadalcanal. They just wanted to say, hey, Bob, you know, how much you mean to us. But they wanted to tell him, you know, they wanted to be comedians with him too. They didn't want to talk about the bad stuff because they had enough of that on a daily basis, as you know.
It's so I've wrapped up the letter writing era when I was in, like that all stopped, you know, when I was in the Army. So I got a taste of that, and getting mail from somewhere was great. When you were writing mail and your buddies are like, what are you going to say? Some letters you're trying to keep private. Other ones you're just sharing. You pass it around and everybody else reads your, you know, letter. It is so crazy when you think about these things. So I know with these conversations, when these guys are absolutely in a foxhole, and they're killing time and they're taking this time to write. And so like, tell Bob this and say that. And, you know, and there's all this hilarity, just the joy of writing the letter to Bob Hope. You know,
it gets their mind off of everything. And they're not thinking about a previous battle. They're not thinking about a future battle. They're just living in that moment. And that moment is cathartic in many ways, being able to write home and have that connection. But to have somebody come out from home, that's a different story. It's almost like if your big brother showed up from California out to Iwo Jima or, you know, Peleliu or some island, Guadalcanal, and he just showed up at that. And that's what it was like when Bob went out there. It was America coming to the Pacific or going to Europe or North Africa. And it was just that piece of home that meant so much to you. You had that connection.
Yeah. When you were making the documentary, there's a ton of footage you can choose from.
Yeah.
How do you even try to sort? I mean, look, there's 30,000 plus letters in the archive, right? You can just shoot pictures of letter. And just for people to understand, when you're making a documentary, you're keeping things moving. So nothing is on the screen for more than 3 seconds, 6 seconds, maybe. That's it. And so there's thousands of images to choose from. How on earth did you sort that out?
You look for, you know, for the letters, you look for the most impactful letters under a couple of different categories. One, humorous letters. Two, letters that are filled with sorrow. Letters that are filled with hope, pardon the pun, but letters that represent the spectrum of the type of letters that he got during the war. Obviously, you're not, if he's getting 30,000 a month or 30,000 a week, you're not going to be able to include every letter in this. So you pick out the ones that resonate the most in specific areas and fit into specific parts of the film, like, you know, Peleliu or when he's in Sicily or something, or things like that. So you start out with a film that might be 2 hours long, and you need to get that film down to 53 minutes. And that's the challenging part, because you're taking out a lot of great images and video. You got to use the best of the best and look for things that maybe people haven't seen in Bob Hope documentaries before. So it's always a struggle. No producer or director ever likes to make cuts because they think whatever they have is great. But in order to appeal to a younger audience, in order to keep that film interesting, you need to narrow it all down.
Sometimes when you watch these the Bob Hope channel, if we can just take a second time about that, it's also great, and it's got stuff from
hours and hours and hours.
Oh my gosh, it's great. Some of those jokes, look, they're all done and fun and everything else, but I don't do all those jokes play today. And do you have to worry when you're a director? Are you worried about his repartee with Raquel Welch and everything, or is it passe now? Do you think?
That's stuff from more of the Vietnam era and
Sure.
stuff. In World War II, he approached the shows a little differently. As society opened up more, he would open up more in his shows.
Okay.
As outfits got a little more risque, that would appear in the show. So he stayed with whatever, in the 50s, whatever was happening in the 50s, and then the 60s were a little bit of a different decade, obviously, where more things started to happen and more things started to open up. So I think he did a great job. In World War II, it was really a family show. It was really, the jokes were more PG or depending on his audience, things like that. But it wasn't an R-rated show. And I don't think he ever strived for an R-rated show. But you also adapt to the times and things become a little bit more accepted. So Raquel Welch in a little skimpier outfit than Frances Langford would have ever worn during World War II was accepted in the 1960s. And that's just the way it was. And I think he used to do the show where he used to introduce the All-American football team, and they used to come out and, he'd make jokes depending on their position and things like that. And that's what I remember from like the 70s and
Sure.
the 80s and stuff like that. But he changed with the times. He started in vaudeville, and that was just a quick stage presence where you needed quick reactions and you needed to be able to do multiple things and everything. And he adapted that to his shows in World War II, but that changed later with, he went to Afghanistan, and I think it was 1993 was his last show. And so he had gone all the way from World War II through into Afghanistan. And the shows changed with the audiences from the 40s into the 90s.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I appreciate it. What did you learn about Bob because when you get into these things, you have your hands on the letters, you're doing all the photography and everything, you're reading through this stuff, you get a different perspective. So what did you pick up?
I think his bravery was something that stood out. His wife, Dolores, always said he always kind of had that when it's my time attitude. That's what got him through Alaska, and then got him going to Europe and all over the United States and going to the Pacific. He kind of had a little bit of daredevil in him. And I think that's what allowed him to come to peace with going and so far. And making sure. One of the interesting things I didn't know about Bob was they would do a main show. Let's say it's on Guadalcanal. They'd have 10,000 or 30,000 attend the show. But if there was a small company that was up on a ridge guarding the ridge, he would go find them and do like a 12-minute show. He wanted everybody to be entertained. So he would ask the officers, who's out right now on the perimeter where I could get up there in a Jeep or a truck and we could do a little show for them if it's allowed. And he would do that. He would leave the main stage after he was done, and he and Jerry Colonna would get into a truck, drive up, to the ridges or whatever it is, and they would do another show, a quicker show. But they wanted to entertain as many people as they could, and that included hospitals. They spent a lot of time in hospitals, and they saw a lot of bad stuff. But he always told his troupe, we need to be upbeat. We need to have a smile. We need to go in there and entertain them. We cannot let them see us be worried for them. And I think that meant a lot to the guys who were in the hospital too, and the women, the nurses, and everybody else who were there, the doctors.
Someone like what's her name, Frances Langford, right? She's not. We don't. I mean, of that troupe, really, Bob Hope's the one whose name is sort of relevant today.
Yeah, but nobody remembers these people the way that they should, and we try to educate people and say, well, back in the day, Frances Langford was like, okay, let's compare her to somebody today who would be, Taylor Swift is great. Taylor Swift is beautiful. She's a great singer. She's a great performer. So Frances Langford was that in the 40s. So how do you relate people from the 40s like Glenn Miller and Bob Hope to this generation? So you try to say, there was Bob Hope, and then there was Jimmy Kimmel, and then there was Bob Hope, and there was Jimmy Fallon or David Letterman or John Mulaney. So history, you need to be able to bring the 20th century into the 21st century for these young people. Otherwise, they're going to be like, I don't know who this person is.
There was a certain style of music back then too. I had a guy named Sammy Nestico on the show, and he is of that era. And he composed music from the trombone, his home instrument, and he was in Tommy Dorsey's Orchestra. You know, he did all this stuff. He worked with Duke Ellington, and he knew these guys. And so there was a certain style of music. And Francis singing "I'm in the Mood for Love." There's a lot of songs like that, you know, and they're like Between the Starlight and all that kind of. You know, there's these great songs that are, you know, with the trombone solo, which doesn't make any sense today, but everybody knows, at least I think, everybody knows that song, "I'm in the Mood for Love." You can think of it, you can hum it right now. It's very catchy.
Yeah, and the veterans talked about that. One of the veterans talked about Frances Langford singing that song. I think it was on Pavuvu. So she starts to sing, "I'm in the mood for love," and some Marine yells out, "Well, baby, you came to the right place." So you got 10,000 Marines sitting around watching her sing, and she's beautiful, and she just smiled and laughed, and that was, you know, that was fun for the guys to do.
There is there's a certain kind of comedy in the combat world, and again, it makes me emotional thinking about it because I can think of my own times and everything. But like when the dudes are bobbing heads in the ocean after the Midway sinks and they get rescued, the ship finally shows up 5 days later, and it's been a horror show the whole time. The guy officer on the deck is like, you know, "Hello, you know, how are you guys?" or something like that. And then one of the guys cracks a joke. He's like, "Typical officer, no idea what's going on." People
you need humor. You
right
need
now.
humor. You need humor in those situations, and you know that's a guy who's probably a good leader because he's staying calm. You know,
right. But it's just so amazing that there's a lot of funny moments in combat, and these guys on Pavuvu are about to go invade an island and know what's coming, and have talked to the guys that have done it before. But there's time for comedy, there's time for music and everything. There's time for love.
Yeah, there's time for all that, and those guys were able to, you know, pick that moment to be in the moment, and I think that's what, you know, they're going to worry about Peleliu tomorrow morning and getting there and with the fight and everything. But it really has to be emotional just to know you're performing in front of these groups of people, and the next day a lot of them aren't going to be here anymore, and you give an extra good performance when you look out and you see all those young faces, and you know tomorrow is probably going to be really rough for them. So
when you got some of the family members in the doc. Everybody should go watch this documentary. Let me put the link up for it while we're talking here. But was it Jerry Coloma's kids that you got on there? You got a couple people.
Yeah. And I mean, Francis has passed, Patty Thomas has passed, Bob has obviously passed, Jerry Colonna passed. But we were able to talk to Joe Colonna, his grandson, and he used to talk about, you know, how proud he was and still proud of what his grandfather did during World War II. And Bob Hope is actually, I think, his godfather. So they had such a close relationship, and they stayed close after the war. They were just one of those teams that meshed together. And it just, to be able to talk to Linda Hope about her father coming home and practicing his material for his next radio show at the dinner table, you know, with her and her brother and her mother, and getting an inside look at, you know, a lot of the times Linda had no idea, she was 6, where her dad was, you know, coming or going. Where is he going next? Is he going to the Pacific? Is he going to Europe? How long is he going to be? How dangerous is this going to be? And a lot of the times it was a secret. Bob didn't even know when he got on the planes where he was going, because they had to keep it top secret because it could give away the upcoming battle, and give away Bob Hope's location. And so imagine getting on a plane and not know where you're going, but knowing when you get there, it's probably going to be near the combat zone, and you're going to be entertaining, you know, a lot of people who are facing some pretty long odds.
Yeah. And again, like you said, sometimes right there where the combat is happening, and it's, you know, there's explosions that are audible, all that kind of thing. Even if you're on a big camp, like in Iraq, if you're on the Al-Fa Palace camp, a cluster of American camps, you're just as safe as can be, but there's always that dull roar of combat going on, you know, and that's the same thing for those guys. And you know, Frances Langford can be as tough as she wants to be, but people aren't used to that. You know, you watch our war correspondents today, oh my God, and the bomb is like way up in the distance, and you laugh at them. But that's because they're not familiar with. You're not supposed to be familiar with that.
No, only a select group of people are familiar with that, and those are the people who've been at the front lines and been in combat. And even guys who've been in combat and then are wounded and come back again, it takes them a little bit, for at least in World War II, to get back into that element again. Even being in the
Yeah.
hospital wounded during World War II for 2 months, your unit's moved on and has been in more battles, and you come back and you got to be acclimated to replacements and to your men again. And it's not an easy
Yeah.
thing.
It's funny. A lot of these folks that were in that troop, Tony Romano,
Mm.
what's the other lady's name? I'll think of it in a second here.
Patty
They
Thomas.
lived yeah, Patty Thomas. Yeah, she lived until about 10 years ago. These
Yeah,
folks lived a long time.
they
Do
did.
you attribute that all to what the mission that they were on? Is there any kind of, or is that just because there's so many of them made it for so long? I mean, Bob made it a long time.
Yeah, Bob, Bob made it to 100. And so, yeah, I don't know. Maybe the key to life is bringing joy to other people. And
Yeah.
maybe you sleep a little better at night, or maybe you alter your life a little bit after you've done all that, and realize, don't sweat the small stuff when you've seen
Yeah.
what they've seen. So maybe it did. I mean, you're right. They all did live a long life, and
Yeah.
so it could have had something. So I think the best advice is to try and bring joy to others, and realize that's your gift.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. There's something to it. And even if you don't live a long life, you still try to do that, right?
Yeah.
And let the cards fall.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's an incredible thing. The USO continues to just give and give and give too. So let's not discount their role in this. I have gone to many a USO and gotten a much needed nap before I had to go do the next thing. And if that's all I got, maybe I got some juice and a cookie. But you get warm smiles, you get hello. I appreciate you. I get thanked all the time.
Yeah.
But when you go into USO, it is like going into your living room, at least for a few minutes. It's really great. I don't know how much you've been in the USOs.
I have been in a lot. We've been in the USO at Guam. We've spent some time there on Guam, and we were just in Nashville last week, and they have a great USO club at Nashville's airport, staffed by wonderful people. So yeah, I mean, I've seen more USO places pop up in airports, and I think it's just great. It's
yeah. And again, I think Bob is so. I mean, it's bigger than iconic. He's so elemental to the USO's mission and everything. All of these folks are his progeny. To come with that attitude, because they're old enough to remember Bob Hope, at least like I do, and if not more directly if they're older. Yeah. And you just know you have a mission, and he set the standard, and it's really high.
Yeah, it's really high, and he did it for so long. And that's, it wasn't just a World War II thing. I mean, he went on after that, and he thought it so important that he continued it, right into the 1990s. So that's dedication.
Yeah. When you guys were working on this project, did you get a chance to talk to any World War II folks? I don't recall if I saw any in the hour.
We have about 3 or 4 veterans in the film who talk about seeing Bob. One was a Marine of the 1st Marine Division who was on Pavuvu, who had to go to Peleliu the next couple of days after. And then we had other guys who were in Europe. Another guy who was in the Pacific, and they all just talk about him with a smile on their face. You talk to them about combat and what it was like and things like that. But then when you switch the conversation to Bob Hope, it's when they really start to relax and smile and, say, oh, that was one of the best time we had with my buddies, and seeing Francis Langford up there, and, and they all smile. And most of them, I'd say like 80 to 85% had seen Bob Hope in World War II, the veterans we interview as a whole. So he reached a lot of people, because it's not uncommon for them to say, oh, I saw him here, I saw him there, I saw him 3 times.
Oh, yeah.
So
again, that's remarkable. I mean, the way that Pacific fight is so spread out.
Yeah.
I guess it's kind of consolidated in the islands, I suppose. But it's just, people don't even go there at all. Like to get to Pavuvu today, it is still with jets. It takes want and desire to get there.
It took about 36 hours for us to get from the East Coast of the United States to Guadalcanal. Yeah. So it's long. It's a lot of stops. Not as many stops as it was during World War II, but yeah, it's not easy to get there. And he was on the next island over called Bonica, and what an officer said, "Hey Bob, by the way, the 1st Marine Division's across the way here on this island, and they're getting ready to fight. Can you go do a show?" They were like, "Yeah." So he wasn't even planning to do that show in Pavuvu. It's just that he was on Banica, which is close to Guadalcanal. And someone said, these guys are getting ready to go into a horrific fight. Can you do an extra show? And he said, yes.
What does that look like? I mean, how the logistics for that? Okay, great. The Admiral says, go ahead and do it. Bob says, go ahead and do it. Is it that simple? Does he have a dedicated flight? Do they just make space? What?
They put up a temporary, stage there, and so they made it available for him to do, and they flew over from Banica on one of those little grasshopper planes that they had during World War II, kind of a reconnaissance plane. It was a very quick flight, but they had to land in the road because there was no runway on Pavuvu. So they had to land on a dirt road, and Jerry Colonna's falling out of the plane as they start to come in, and someone has to grab him, and all the Marines are looking up, and it's like Santa coming on Christmas.
Yeah, I remember this story now, and the thing, because you said it was Jerry. He had his leg dangling out, and then lost it. They hit something, and not hit anything big, but like a turbulence or whatever. That's crazy, right? And he easily could have fallen out. I've been on the edge of an airplane, and I'm just a big guy. So like if I move around inside of a little, like I'm going to jump out of this kind of airplane, the door came flying open. Like it's just easy to do, and you're not buckled in. You're on an airplane, and I didn't come anywhere near falling out, but there just wasn't much room.
Yeah,
and all of a sudden it's you and nothing.
Yeah, they weren't that high. But still, he would have died if he had fallen out. I guess from one of the veterans said the plane had kind of wagged its wings a little bit just to say hello, and Jerry wasn't prepared for that. So Jerry almost, went out. And Jerry didn't have a parachute, so he learned. He learned from that.
Yeah. How do people watch this thing? I mean, I've got the link up here. It's PBS. But is that the best way to do it?
Yeah, they can go to their local PBS website, wherever they are. And then they can type in the title of the film, Miles, Morale and Memories, Bob Hope and World War II. And it'll give them a schedule for when it's going to air on their PBS station. And then it'll eventually be on our website. And we also have a global app where people can watch all of our films on Roku and Fire Stick and iPhones and Android and stuff. So it'll start really coming out middle of May and then heading towards Memorial Day.
And then tell us what the website is, and then let's talk about the app too, to make sure everybody knows where to get this stuff.
The website is WWII, like World War II, WWII Foundation.org, O-R-G. And we have about 38 of our 40 films up there right now, and people can watch them for free. And we encourage teachers to use the link. And it's the same with the global app. The global app is it's called the World War II WWII streaming channel. And you can find that on iTunes or Android, and then you can also find it. It's an app that you can download on Fire Stick and Roku as well. So we push all this content.
The same 38 documentaries are on there too.
Yeah, and it's broken down into Europe, Pacific, D-Day, Pearl Harbor, lots of. And we have celebrities narrate all our films, which is great. In addition to Gary, Jim Nance, we've had everybody from Bill Belichick, believe it or not, to Tom Brokaw, Luke Bryan, Darius Rucker, Kevin Bacon, Paul Giamatti, Keith Morrison from Dateline. We get these amazing people to voice of our films, and they're all very patriotic individuals.
Especially in this day and age when we're trying to figure out the fraud, waste, and abuse, we're not going to get into politics, but who pays for this? And I don't expect Kevin Bacon to work for free. Wouldn't surprise me if he did, but I would never expect that. I would expect to pay him to do voiceover work. That's his job. So who pays for all this stuff? I
have to go out and raise all the money. And we have we try to find corporate and individual sponsors for all of our films. And that's the hard part. I mean, raising money is not an easy thing, as you know. That has always been a challenge for us. We've got some pretty good potential leads we're working on now. But once in a while, you get a yes from a great company like American Airlines or TriWest Healthcare or Enterprise or FedEx. So you get 100 no's, and then someone at FedEx like Fred Smith, who was a Marine in Vietnam. Fred was and founded FedEx. And he gets our mission because he spent time in the military and is a wonderful man. So fundraising is difficult. We also have a museum in Rhode Island that we fundraise for. It's got about 7,000 World War II artifacts in the museum. And we have a lot of school tours that come in for that, and a lot of people who come actually from all over the country to see the museum. So we're trying to keep that momentum going, and the memory of that generation on the forefront and on the lips of the new generation who unfortunately aren't being taught about World War II in schools. So history is important. It rhymes.
It does rhyme. And there's the link for it's just an extension off of the WWII Foundation.org link, but a lot of resources there. And yeah, these guys are doing great work. You're right about the fundraising thing. You might get 100 no's from FedEx.
Yeah.
And then you get the right meeting, you get the right person, you get the right season. And it's like, well, yeah, why not? And you're like, why didn't you say yes 10 years ago?
There's no rhyme nor reason to fundraising. I found now doing this for 40 films. So it just, it's like your high school dating career. You hear no all the time. And then finally some girl says, yeah, I'll go to the Sadie Hawkins dance with you. So it's like, okay, for 100 no's, I've got Betty going to the dance with me, and Betty's not bad.
I like that you're asking girls to the Sadie Hawkins dance too.
Not now. Let's correct
that.
No,
not now. But I mean, back in high school, because the girls are supposed to ask the guys for Sadie Hawkins. You're like,
that's
if I'm waiting around, no one's going to ask me.
That's how desperate I was.
That's the same. I'm like, I'm going to lock something down. I'm not going alone.
I'm not waiting.
Yeah.
Wait. rules be damned for the Sadie Hawkins dance.
Exactly. We got to make sure our cred stays good. Like I'm going to be good enough. I'm going to wait and poor girl probably screwed up all the courage in the world. And I was like, I'm already going with somebody else. Sorry.
That's how I got used to no. But when you get a yes, you're very appreciative, and you really make sure. We have a world premiere of our film coming up this weekend in Nashville. And Gary Sinise is going to host the world premiere. It's going to be at Lainey Wilson's restaurant on Broadway in Nashville. And it's great. Bridgestone is going to sponsor it. And we're going to have about 100 people there. A very low key world premiere, but Gary's going to be there, and he voiced it. And we're really thankful.
Yeah. And it's wonderful. I watched it and I loved it. I want to go watch it again, but I'm going to watch it on PBS to help the numbers out and everything. Will we be able to buy this thing?
We don't generally. We make it all available for free. And so on our website, all of our films are free. We don't believe in putting up a paywall for people to learn about World War II, whether that be educators, students, or the public. And then on the app, it's always free as well. You just sign up for a free account and you can watch, 40 plus hours of World War II documentary films narrated by Dan Aykroyd and everybody else. So.
And is this all you do in terms of making documentaries? This is your job? Yeah.
It's my child. We built a big monument in Normandy, France, and behind Utah Beach. And we did that back in 2012. It honors Dick Winters, the leader of World War II's Band of Brothers. And so it's become one of the most visited monuments in Normandy. So we got into the monument business a little bit, but our primary job is to raise money for the films and the museum. And every year we take college students back to Europe on one of our film trips to get the younger generation of filmmakers and historians interested in World War II. Yeah.
I know Jim DeFelice. You may or may not know Jim, but he's written a number of World War II books. He wrote one about Ray Lambert. And Ray Lambert is
I read that book. Ray was
Yeah, and it was neat that President Trump, the last time we went there, he name checks Ray Lambert, and Ray Lambert's got days left to live. Like I was going to get him on the show, and he was too old for it. Yeah. But there's that hunk of concrete that he hid behind, and it's still there, and it's
got a plaque
on it. Oh, it does have a plaque. Okay, yeah, it's like a brutal monument. Yeah,
they put a plaque on it to honor Ray and the medics and the people who landed on Omaha Beach on D-Day.
Yeah.
And so it's amazing to go back. We spent a lot of time in Normandy, and it's probably one of the most emotional places you can ever visit.
There's a lot of souls there, for sure.
9,387 in the American cemetery, and most of them were teenagers and young men.
It's crazy. That's crazy. Yeah, it's insanity. When you have done all this travel, I mean, New Caledonia and all these other places you might be able to get to, which places stand out besides obviously look, Normandy's always going to stand out
Yeah.
because that's the one that we know the most. But
Yeah, Normandy stands out. Auschwitz, going back to visit the concentration camps. We've been back to 3 camps: Auschwitz, Dachau, and Treblinka. I've been to, Iwo Jima and Peleliu. Those are because of the horror that occurred in both places. I mean, it was just bridled savagery. Those stand out. Pearl Harbor, we spent a lot of time at Pearl Harbor, and that's where it began for the United States. And we knew a lot of the veterans, the USS Arizona veterans, of which there are none left now, but we knew a lot of the guys who were left. I think anytime as a kid you've read about a World War II battle and then you go back to that location and you still see the bullet holes on the buildings and everything like that, it really brings it home. So Corregidor is another place, the Philippines, retracing the route of the Bataan Death March and everything, and then talking to survivors of the Bataan Death March. So there are certain locations out there that you never think you're going to ever go to, and when you get there, you're like, "Oh my God, this is like it was in 1944."
Yeah. It is. It's wild. Harold Bray, the last survivor from the USS Indianapolis, is from my hometown.
Okay.
And the one curse with all these things too, and I'm curious, filmmaker wise, what you do with this. The one story that Harold gets to tell all the time is the worst day of his life, because the ship, he hadn't even done anything in the Navy yet. He got on the ship in Vallejo as a trainee, all right, that's my first job. And then, 2 weeks later, the ship's on the bottom of the ocean and he hadn't even done anything but take a ride,
He didn't even know why he had taken a ride. He was, they're delivering components of the atomic bomb. So the mission is so secret. So, he goes on this mission, your ship gets sunk by a Japanese submarine, and all of a sudden you're in it with sharks. So that moment from Jaws, where Quint is reciting his time on the Indianapolis, ignited the whole story of the Indianapolis again in the 1970s and what they went through, and not being able to report their location and where they went down and how many guys were killed by sharks. And it's just one of those things where you can't imagine yourself going through anything like that.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, and so Harold has been forced, he's been on my show and everything. He's been forced to tell this god-awful story over and over and over again.
I'm glad he does, though, Pete. I'm glad he does. It probably is good for him to talk about it in many ways instead of just having nightmares about it at night. Some guys came back and they talked about everything they did. Some guys didn't talk about anything they did. It depends on the person, but I have to feel as though by him talking about it, it's not in the back of his mind anymore, and he's not, constantly, maybe not reliving it every day, but still, it doesn't dominate his thoughts like it probably did when he first got home.
Yeah, it's interesting. He says a couple things about that. The first thing is the Navy's like, where do you want to go next? We'll do whatever you want. And he's like, nowhere near water.
Of course.
So they sent him to Great Lakes, which sounds like it's right next to water because it is, but he's not going in that water. But he goes to Great Lakes and does training. And then never told his parents. Yeah. Never told them. No. Just didn't feel the need. And when he explains it, it's like, hey, a lot of guys had it worse. And so I'm not going to make all these guys, know, are
he's probably talking about the guys who died, or without limbs, or even his fellow sailors who were killed by sharks. Yeah, they did have it worse, but that was pretty bad.
It's pretty bad. Yeah,
it was pretty bad.
And in my combat soul, I got that. I mean, actually, when he heard it, I kind of passed it by. It was my partner John that's like, "Did you hear what he just said?" And I was like, "No." Of course, he didn't talk about it because guys had it, But it's hit me ever since then. I thought, he didn't even make a big deal about it to his folks or anything. Kept it inside. Obviously, he's told that story over and over again now, but it's it's compartmentalized for a reason because that stuff is always going to hurt the rest of your life.
Yeah, and a lot of the times it was their wives who unfortunately dealt with all the stuff of being kicked at night and the nightmares, and a lot of these
treated
guys
like shit.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of these guys came home and they drank, because that was not the generation to sit on the couch and explain to a psychologist their feelings. That wasn't the generation.
No,
So
it was not.
families had to deal with decades. And one of the veterans we interviewed, I won't say his name, but he was in the Navy at Normandy and in on the first wave. And he told me, I finally went to go see a psychologist. I was 86. My God, and but he did eventually thought that would be the best thing, but he was 86 years old when that was a very tough generation.
Yeah. I mean, Louis Zamperini, his story is great.
Yeah.
And anybody knows that. And I know you know this, but the rescue planes quite often went down.
Yeah.
And which is what happened in his rescue. That plane disappeared too.
Yeah.
And so these guys just weren't supposed to live, and they were incredibly tough, and they had the greatest generation. But then when they came home, all that damage was still with them, when folks get down on religion, there's someone like Billy Graham who holds tent revivals, and thousands of people walk out of his tent saying, I'm fixed.
Yeah.
And it's amazing that someone like Ernie goes into Billy Graham's tent and comes out fixed. You can say whatever you want about how and everything, but a lot of those World War II guys were saved in some way like that. And thank goodness, because it's just torture to live with that.
They needed something, they found religion. And Zamperini is a great example of that. And, the book by Laura Hildenbrand is still, one of the best World War II books out there.
It's so good. Have you read that book, Shangri-La?
I have not read it yet, but I do have it in my library.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how you do a documentary on it. It could just ultimately be a movie, basically, but that story's crazy.
Yeah, there are a lot of them. There are a lot of stories from World War II that should be feature films and documentaries and books. And amazing stories. A great author out there is Adam Makos. He wrote the book Devotion, and they made it into a movie that came out a few years ago. But he's done some incredible books about the personal stories of the war and Germans and American pilots becoming friends after the war for these amazing reasons why. Marcus Brotherton, Alex Kershaw, great authors, all John McManus, all great authors who really get into the personal stories of that generation.
Yeah. I can't remember his name right now. It's like T. Martin somebody, but he wrote a book about the first Japanese guy to zero in his zero on the ships. That guy survives the war and becomes an American citizen. And he went from hating the Americans to loving them. All right, well, listen, I don't want to take any more of your time. We've been talking a lot, and I appreciate you. Everybody should go check it out. Then maybe just put a couple links up here. Look, just go to WWIIfoundation.org and you'll find everything you need there. For sure, watch this thing. It's fantastic. Anything in closing before we go, Tim?
No, I just, we're always looking for people to help us with our mission, and people who believe that generation's stories need to be preserved for younger people. And that's what we do. It's all about education.
I love it. All right, stand by. I'll come say goodbye to you.